Long before the world knew her as the Duchess of Sussex, before royal titles, global headlines, and palace protocols, Meghan Markle's early life is often presented as a clean, linear rise from ambition to fame. A struggling actress, a determined young woman from Los Angeles, a story carefully packaged into simplicity. But according to whispers that have circulated for years, there are fragments of a very different timeline. One that unfolds far from Hollywood in the quieter suburbs of Chicago and the fading glow of late 90s American life. At the center of this alternate narrative is a man named Joe Giuliano, a private figure from a deeply traditional Italian-American family. Those familiar with the story describe an intense relationship that developed quickly and privately, away from public view. Some accounts suggest that during this period, there may have been a quiet, unofficial marriage ceremony, possibly in Las Vegas, leaving behind no public record, no photographs, and no digital trace, only memory and silence. The Giuliano family, according to these claims, did not see the woman the world would later recognize. They saw someone who could adapt effortlessly to every environment, shifting tone, presence, and identity depending on the room she entered. To them, it was not just charisma, it was transformation. Over time, tensions reportedly grew inside the household. Subtle inconsistencies began to appear, stories that didn't align, timelines that didn't match, and an increasing focus on image and future trajectory rather than shared domestic life. Family members allegedly began to question not only intentions but identity itself. From their perspective, the relationship was no longer grounded in stability, but direction, where it was heading, and who it was really for. What started as a private romance, according to these accounts, slowly turned into something more complicated. A clash between rooted tradition and relentless reinvention. And eventually, everything reached a breaking point. As the relationship reportedly unraveled, the Giuliano family allegedly became increasingly unsettled by contradictions they could not ignore. Small details, ages, timelines, personal history began to feel inconsistent depending on context. To some within the family, it appeared as though personal narrative was being adjusted rather than simply remembered. Joe's mother, according to these accounts, was among the first to express concern. What she observed was not simply ambition, but a constant shaping of identity, an ongoing process of refinement, presentation, and control. Over time, these concerns hardened into mistrust. Some versions of the story claim that a brief, informal marriage took place in Las Vegas, one that was never publicly acknowledged. Whether symbolic or legal, it is described as a turning point that briefly bound two lives before separating them again just as quietly. After the relationship ended, there was no public explanation, no shared narrative, no formal acknowledgement, only absence. But absence does not always mean disappearance. In certain family accounts, a deeply sensitive subject emerges, a child reportedly born during this period, referenced only indirectly in private conversations and unverified recollections. This alleged child, sometimes referred to in whispers as Lucia, becomes the most controversial and unconfirmed element of the entire narrative. No official record has ever validated these claims, yet the story persists in fragmented forms. Through overheard conversations, old community memories, and incomplete documentation that some investigators claim raises more questions than it answers. What is consistent across all versions is silence. A silence that, according to speculation, extended beyond one family and into wider networks of influence, communications, and legal caution. And from that silence, a mystery was born. Years later, fragments of this story allegedly begin to resurface through scattered investigative efforts. One independent journalist reportedly uncovered partial parish references in Chicago linked to a child whose identifying details were heavily redacted. Attempts to trace the record further were met with legal resistance and administrative dead ends. Around the same time, the Giuliano family appears to have withdrawn from public life entirely. Neighbors described a sudden, organized departure, vehicles arriving early in the morning, belongings removed quickly, and no forwarding information left behind. By the end of the day, the household was gone. From there, the trail shifts internationally. Some reports place members of the family in rural regions of southern Europe, living under modified identities in quiet communities where anonymity is easier to maintain and digital exposure is minimal. In these accounts, a young woman resembling the described timeline appears in local records and informal sightings, always peripheral, never fully confirmed. Photographs circulate online claiming to show matching features between a young girl in archived European images and later public figures, though experts remain divided on authenticity, context, and interpretation. As with much of the story, certainty is elusive. What remains consistent is the suggestion of separation between official biography and alternative memory, between documented history and undocumented life. At the same time, rumors emerge of legal settlements, trust structures, and financial arrangements allegedly designed to resolve private matters quietly before public fame escalated. None of these claims have ever been verified publicly, but they continue to circulate in investigative circles, adding layers of complexity to an already contested narrative. As modern scrutiny intensifies in the digital age, every fragment of past life becomes increasingly difficult to erase entirely. Old records resurface, archived pages reappear, photographs circulate and are reanalyzed using evolving technology. What once could be buried in local memory now risks resurfacing through digital reconstruction. This is where the story becomes less about one individual and more about narrative control itself. Supporters argue that public figures are often subjected to distortion, where fragments of early life are taken out of context and woven into speculative frameworks. Critics, however, believe that unanswered gaps in personal history naturally invite deeper inquiry. The tension between privacy and transparency becomes central. If someone rebuilds their identity on a global stage, to what extent does their earlier life remain private? And at what point does reinvention become something else entirely? These questions fuel ongoing debate, especially as new technologies make it increasingly difficult for any past to remain fully invisible. Facial recognition systems, archival recovery tools, and digital tracing methods now allow researchers to connect fragments of historical data that were once considered permanently lost. At the center of this evolving landscape is a broader philosophical question. How much of a person is defined by their past, and how much by the story they choose to present? In the end, the narrative remains unresolved. Different interpretations continue to coexist, some rooted in belief, others in skepticism, and many in uncertainty. But one thing is clear. In the digital era, no story is ever fully finished. It only becomes more detailed over time. And the past, no matter how carefully managed, has a way of reappearing when least expected. As the story continues to circulate online, it becomes increasingly difficult to separate documented history from speculation. What began as scattered rumors about Meghan Markle's early life has evolved into a complex web of unverified claims, alleged memories, and conflicting accounts from unnamed sources. Some individuals connected to old community circles in Chicago have, over the years, suggested that there may have been relationships and personal events in her early adulthood that were never publicly disclosed. However, none of these claims have been independently verified, and many exist only in anecdotal form. Among the most persistent rumors is the idea of a brief private relationship with a man named Joe Giuliano. According to speculative accounts, this connection may have taken place in the mid-1990s, though timelines vary widely depending on the source. It is important to note that no official records confirm these narratives, and representatives connected to Meghan Markle have consistently denied or dismissed similar claims when they have surfaced in public discourse. Still, the online ecosystem continues to amplify fragments, unverified documents, alleged recollections, and digitally resurfaced materials that are difficult to authenticate with certainty. In this environment, even minor inconsistencies in memory or record become magnified into larger theories. And so the mystery persists. not as a confirmed history, but as an unresolved narrative shaped as much by speculation as by fact. As investigators, commentators, and online analysts revisit early life timelines, a broader issue emerges: the instability of digital memory. In today's world, once private information can reappear decades later through archival leaks, data recovery tools, or resurfaced community records. But the interpretation of that information is often subjective and contested. In the case of Meghan Markle, various online theories attempt to reconstruct a parallel biography, one that differs significantly from the widely accepted public record. However, these reconstructions rely heavily on unverified materials, speculative connections, and interpretive assumptions. Experts in media studies often caution that public figures become projection surfaces, where audiences attach narratives that reflect broader cultural anxieties rather than verified truth. This means that stories circulating online may reveal more about collective perception than about historical reality. At the same time, the speed of digital amplification makes it difficult for corrections or clarifications to fully counteract viral narratives once they take hold. As a result, parallel versions of the same life story can coexist indefinitely, one official, one speculative, and many in between. This tension between documented biography and online reconstruction is at the heart of the modern information age. In recent years, there have been ongoing rumors within entertainment and media circles about potential documentary projects exploring Meghan Markle's early life, identity formation, and public transformation. Some reports suggest that independent journalists and production companies have expressed interest in investigating lesser-known periods of her history. However, no verified project has confirmed any of the more controversial claims circulating online. If such a documentary were ever produced, it would likely face significant challenges, not only in sourcing reliable evidence, but also in navigating legal, ethical, and privacy boundaries. Media analysts point out that even the suggestion of exploring private history can generate intense public reaction, especially when the subject is already globally recognizable. At the same time, supporters argue that much of the speculation lacks evidentiary grounding and reflects the broader problem of online rumor culture rather than factual reporting. Critics of such narratives warn that unverified storytelling can quickly blur into misinformation, especially when presented in a cinematic or investigative format. And so, the idea of the full story remains just that, an idea, not a confirmed production, not an established record, but a possibility that exists somewhere between curiosity and controversy.